Hey there, I'm Rainy Zimnak, and on today's episode, we're going to cover one out of the three-part series of the financial hacks that I'm about to share with you when you, the agent, are working with a seller that has to sell a property that needs a lot of work, and your only buyer is an investor buyer. They want a certain amount, the buyer, investor can't come up to that number. How do we bridge that gap? That's what I will share with you today. So let me paint a situation. So you are the listing agent on this property. Your client, the seller, has a property that needs a lot of work. It's free and clear, so there's no liens, no financial liens, and they are not in a rush to get all the funds right now. They could wait, right? But your only buyer for this type of property is a buyer that is a cash buyer. Most likely an investor because of the amount of work the property needs. So that's the situation. So now you get an offer from a cash buyer on this property, but your client wants more money. And you cannot find a way to get the investor to increase their price because the numbers just don't make sense anymore for the investor. So what do? So here is one thing that I would recommend to consider, and ask your seller if they would be willing to be the bank, meaning seller financed the situation. Instead of, and here's how this plays out. So instead of the buyer, the investor, who in most cases, 99% of cases, they're going to borrow money to buy that house, they will have to pay interest to someone on that money. Well, what if that someone is your client, your seller? And they actually made the additional money in interest form instead of a higher purchase price. So now what we just did, and I just had this play out actually last week. I had an investor client that offered a certain amount to a seller and they wanted to net more money because they were not in a rush. So we did present an offer that actually included seller financing. And in this price point, because it is San Diego, they tend to be, higher price points here. What that actually equaled to was $30,000 in additional interest that the seller would get when the property sells because they are the bank now. So that's one way of you being able to bridge the gap. Think about it. It was $30,000 that would have went to some other hard money lender, private money lender that the buyer would have to use, right, to finance the purchase. Instead, we showed that to the client, the listing agent's client, saying, look, your seller could actually get this $30,000 if they're willing and open to do seller financing, right? So what happens next? Basically, if you have both parties to agree in that to those terms, then you actually set up a seller financing documentation. So it's a regular loan, just like any bank, right? I'm not giving you legal advice, so make sure you get the correct documents from Department of Real Estate or an attorney, but it's pretty simple to set up. The buyer actually gives a down payment. There is an actual closing, so the seller actually receives some money, but the rest of the money, they will actually receive when the buyer who buys the property to rehab and then sell, which usually is around 6 months for us here in San Diego for our clients. That's when the seller will actually recoup all of their money plus the interest, right? So they have to be patient and wait potentially 3, 4, 6 months to receive all of the funds. But if you remember, the situation was they're not in a rush. Your client, the seller, if you're that agent listing that property, is not in a rush. So if they could wait 4, 6 months, they could get an additional $30,000 like in this situation that we had here in San Diego, right? Another thing that I could mention is you could set up is the buyer, the investor, can actually make monthly payments, right? Just like they would to a bank. So you could set up a regular monthly payment where they pay a principal or an interest to your client, the seller. Or you could set up just a balloon payment where they will receive all of the money that they lent plus interest when the property sells within the 4 to 6 month period, which is a pretty typical timeline for these type of properties. And that's how you create a win-win. Analyzing a property before you buy it is obviously very important. However, what I find that most people just do it wrong. And I know that alone, one mistake could cost you tens and thousands of dollars. It could literally cost you your business. And I don't want that to happen to you. So I created a step-by-step property analysis guide sheet to walk you through exactly what to look for to make sure your deal that you're looking at is worth buying. To get the property analysis guide sheet, just go to randyzimnock.com.